We've been working for and in marriage for close to 30 years. It's a hard mission. It is a vocational state in which most adults spend the majority of their life. It is the heart of the family. Couples say that their marriage is their most important thing in life, and the church identifies it as a vocational sacrament. You would think that people care deeply about marriage, about their marriage, and in fact they say they do. But by and large, this isn't translated always into practice. Ask couples, what have you done for your marriage today, or even this year? And you'll often get blank looks.
And when we speak of church, we don't speak of our bishops or our priests, we speak of us, the great collective men and women of the church, with our brothers and sisters in clergy and religious life. But if you ask us as church or even public policy makers, what policies have we introduced in the last 2 years or 3 years to support successful marriage? You often get referred to counselling services or family court services. We are great at picking up the casualties at the bottom of the cliff, but with few exceptions, such as one of them by the then Minister Andrews with the Stronger Relationships trial, do we do much at the top of the cliff. At a societal level, marriage and the family life that depends on it is a bit like maintaining a car or our roads or bridges. They can be allowed to decay and neglected for years with minimal observed effect. But then one day we find ourselves in a mess, and that mess takes real investment to fix.
And it's the same at a personal level. The vast majority of marriages that end in divorce are not mired by domestic violence, deep conflict, or irreconcilable differences. They just drift into indifference. They don't blow up through some calamity, they just break down gradually through a lack of care and maintenance, which makes them vulnerable to any bump in the road.
So why are we hopeful about marriage? Why are we not chronically depressed? Well, ironically, for the first time in our culture, everyone wants to talk about marriage. Now, it mightn't be for the reasons we want, but nonetheless, it's a teachable moment. Everyone wants to lay claim to marriage. Again, for dubious reasons, but it's a teachable moment. And we know the basic truth of marriage, that a man and a woman committed in a lifelong relationship and open to life, both sacramentally and naturally evangelizing. That relationship makes visible the invisible presence and reality of God in the world by the way they love. Now, we can complain about all that's happening, and we can feel like it's dark days. But at the same time, and for the first time in our lifetime, marriage is on everybody's lips.
This presents us with an unprecedented teachable moment, and as a church, we need to grasp the opportunity. We need to lead a new enlightenment about marriage, a renaissance. As a church, we can preach all we like about the theology of marriage. We can get caught up in the legalism of valid marriages and communion for the divorced and remarried. These are all important, but at the end of the day, unless the world looks at Catholic married couples and says, I may not understand those Catholics, but I want what they have, then our finest teachings fail to inspire holiness among our own and will fail to evangelise those beyond.
The sacramental gifts of the married is to bring and make visible to the world the incarnational intimacy of our God, a God that loves passionately and urgently. And this is the gift of married love and the calling of every Catholic married couple. The mystery of marriage is grounded in its complementarity. A man falls in love with a woman and a woman with a man. It makes no sense, believe me. Their love becomes so intense, though, that they cannot conceive at some point of living their life apart. And eventually, their love becomes so intense that it goes beyond them into the expression of new life. A child, a new human being who will be loved by God and known by name, chosen by its parents for all eternity.
This whole thing is a mystery. It's exciting, it's dangerous, it's godly. In the Catholic tradition, we have recognised the sacramentality of this mystery, that by the very way a couple loves, they make visible the invisible presence of God. They manifest the reality of God. Married love particularly reveals the intimate, incarnate, urgent and passionate dimension of God's love for us. Married love is passionate love, it's erotic love. We read about it in the Song of Songs, scripture that was considered too risque for seminarians and monks in the Middle Ages. Without the sacramental witness of married love, the Church's understanding of God's love is at risk of being seen as more legalistic than relational, more judgmental than merciful.
So we have an opportunity to be grasped. Now, I spend my life in corporate strategy. And interesting, if you look at the situation we face with marriage today from a corporate strategist's point of view, you would be so excited. Really excited. Like, here are the simple facts. People are still marrying in this country in growing numbers. Almost every single one of them. In fact, I haven't met anyone at the time of their wedding wants to get divorced. No one plans to end it. No one plans to be married so they can get divorced. Most of them who do divorce, in fact, I've never met anyone who is divorced who ever would wish it on their worst enemy, yet alone themselves. It's incredibly painful. And by and large, every couple fears divorce, the breakdown of their relationship. And we know it costs at every level. And as a church, we know more about and care more about marriage than almost any other organisation, secular or religious. So we have more research-based insights as a nation, as a country, and as a church on what it takes to live a successful marriage. And yet in Western culture, it's never been more difficult to be married. So combine these factors and, my God, what an opportunity. We have unlimited demand, we've got a felt need, and we've got fear everywhere. Why is it that we can't convince everybody to be doing marriage enrichment, marriage preparation every day of the week?
Our failure is that we have systematically neglected to speak into this opportunity. We've failed to grasp the challenge. Well, no longer. Failure is indeed bitterly disappointing, but it is somewhat inevitable in taking on enormous challenges. But giving up is not acceptable. Not trying in the first place is not acceptable. We're reminded of Thomas Edison. When asked was he ever discouraged about his first 1800 failed attempts to invent a light bulb, he answered, "Not at all. I discovered 1800 ways not to invent the light bulb."
We're reminded of Winston Churchill's famous speech to the students of Harrow in 1941. Never, never, in nothing great or small, large or petty, never give in except to convictions of honour or good sense. Never yield to force, never yield to the apparent overwhelming might of the enemy.
We draw encouragement from the thought of the disciples, cowering behind locked doors following the crucifixion of the Lord. It does always indeed seem darkest before the dawn.
This is why the work we do is so collectively important.
Through your different works, you are helping marriages be more successful and more enduring. And in doing so, we enable couples to be better living witnesses and literally be the hands and heart of God in their communities.
We would venture that there's more innovation and thought around how to change the world in the area of marriage in this room than in any other gathering we will have this year in this country. This is not a meeting of theorists, it's a meeting of practitioners, of experimenters and of innovators. Not dealing with just the outcomes of failed relationships, but those focusing also on building success in marriage. This takes work in many forms, formation right from the early childhood through schools before marriage. It involves remote, proximate, immediate, and formation after marriage, both enrichment and support.
Your work has never been more needed. The gift and vision of matrimony has never been more needed by the world in which we live. Marriage and the families that arise from them are the most powerful and urgently needed evangelising force in our world.
So as we open this meeting together, we would like to put two propositions on the table for us to reflect on over the next 2 days. The first is that we would like to have us think about and start a dialogue about a fifth, and I think we would argue the missing stage of marriage formation, which is the formation stage of empowerment.
In our traditional thinking of marriage formation in the church, we mostly talk about 4 stages: remote, proximate and immediate formation, which takes place before marriage, and enrichment after. We have a sophisticated understanding that marriage formation starts from the day we are born and moves through a number of phases, and we have, through our schools and marriage preparation, programs built resources to support this. We Catholics are the only organisation of scale to require formal marriage preparation and have done this for decades. And many of us here have the scars to prove it.
The fourth stage, enrichment, recognises that marriage formation does not stop on the wedding day. In fact, marriage formation occurs mainly within marriage. We've been married for 28 years, longer than we ever lived and walked the earth unmarried. And I can tell you, no matter how good our early formation was from our parents and our teachers and our families, no matter how great that weekend we did for marriage preparation was, it was nothing and has been nothing compared to the intense formation we've been through in 28 years of marriage. And we have the scars to prove it.
So we don't do this fourth stage well often. We would argue that no more than 2,000 of the 2 million Catholic married adults will attend some form of marriage enrichment formation this year. That's less than 0.1%. We believe the numbers would be even less for non-Catholics. If we serviced our cars at this rate, we would be walking everywhere.
But our proposition today is we need to go further than just enrichment. We need to recognise a fifth stage, the one we call empowerment. Empowerment takes couples from being merely focused on their immediate family and their immediate relationship to being focused on the redemption of the entire community.
It takes us from being a good, solid, loving couple to being an intentional and active agent, aware of our prophetic calling to not just be members of the church, but leaders in it. It takes us from being merely married to being matrimonied, fully conscious and committed in living out our life in radical testimony to the reality of God's living presence.
Matrimony couples see their marriage not as a private relationship, but as a public affair. They will willfully love each other not just because they feel like it on the day or because they're honouring their marriage vows when they don't feel like it on the day, but because they realise they have a public duty to the community to be a loving presence, to bring Christ's love to the world through their marriage.
Matrimony couples bring to the church a unique perspective to the many challenges we face as a community and as an organisation. Matrimony couples provide for theologians and bishops distinct and powerful insights into the ways to approach some of the trickiest questions we as a community are facing today. Questions like the worthy reception of communion, often discussed in the context of the divorced and remarried, to questions like healing sexual brokenness, through to whether a priest should say Mass ad orientem. It is only through a deliberate and conscious process of empowerment will we as a church develop this prophetic role of matrimony, and it has never been more necessary.
The second proposition we'd like to put on the table for us to reflect on and consider is the question about how do we truly recognise and honour as a church that the distinctive essence, the unique essence, the most powerful essence of the sacrament of matrimony is its sexual nature. Not that it's a sacrament that includes sex, perhaps occasionally on the side for some of us, which is probably the reality of many married couples' busy lives. Now, my parents will speak on this at some stage later, and if you want to lose a week of your life, bail them up and they will talk, and they have been talking forever on this topic, and rightly so. It's an important area, but it's still an area that's undeveloped.
So what makes marriage unique of all sacraments and from all other human relationships is its sexual nature. Sex is holy. It is a total self-donation. We talk about making love. We can talk about it and we can theologize about it, but at the end of the day, only married couples can make it. Despite the confused and over-eroticised culture, we still use these words because they are in fact an accurate description. These are not just nice words. Our sacramental act is making love, and in this act we provide the most profound and closest human witness to the Trinitarian nature of God.
While the culture takes a reductionist and profane attitude towards sex, the church sees sex in all its glory and proclaims wow to the world.
The Catholic faith has the most complete, the most realistic, and the most beautiful understanding of marital union, of sex, and yet we still largely treat it as an awkward cousin. We acknowledge it when it is required, but don't have much to say about it, and have little to do with it as possible. What St. John Paul II started when he established the Pontifical Council of the Family and penned his Theology of the Body, Benedict progressed, and Francis has brought it to a grounded reality.
So here is the question for us as a group. How do we start? to reshape in practical ways the relationship we have with this topic as the heart of our sacrament in the church and beyond the church. Certainly, I think we don't need more theology. We have great theology. Arguably, we need a new narrative. And who better than those working with couples, people who understand the theology but live the reality, than to lead in this area?
Our kids think all the church has to say about sex is no, but they never hear the why. The why is what they need to hear because it's actually a wow. And wow is definitely worth waiting for.
And this is not about the church preaching. This is about us, the church, living, because they will hear it by seeing it. The greatest parenting advice I ever had was worry not that your children will not listen to what you say. Worry more that they will watch what you do. Look at your relationships, look at our relationship, and ask ourselves, are we really proclaiming what we believe? Are we really living our vows? This is our calling, and it's through not the spoken word but the lived reality we make this real. Our couples don't hear much about this topic from each other either. When was the last time we had a dinner party and talked about this in a respectful and useful way? It's a taboo subject. Now, I'm not suggesting we go out and do this every weekend, but seriously, when did we talk about it as a couple? It's for most of us, ourselves included, it's a taboo subject. It's a very sensitive subject. Imagine what would happen if we really understood what it means to renew our wedding vows, which St. John Paul said is every time we make love, we renew our wedding vows. Just think about our parish church the next time they got all the couples to stand up to renew their wedding vows, the scene we would have. But who thinks of making love as a renewal of wedding vows? We intellectually acknowledge it, but what is the reality when we live it?
We need every married couple to seek to have an enriching sex life, something they prioritise as being as important as good verbal communication, and not relegate their lovemaking to something that can only occur when everything is perfect between them, the stars are aligned and the washing is done and the kids are asleep.
So there's the second proposition. How do we bring what we know to be true and we teach to be right, to be something that people really see? Now, what Francis has done with Amoris Laetitia, which we aren't speaking on but others will, is called out the reality of that. I mean, we've just painted a beautiful vision. But marriages don't always work. And every marriage doesn't work all the time. And we've got the scars to prove it. So we live in brokenness, not in perfection, and that's our reality. And I think we need to acknowledge that people who live in the brokenness of failed relationship are as profound and prophetic by how they respond to that situation as the couples who live in still and can manage to live in the reality of the marriage. And there are as many couples out there, and ourselves included, who live in the marriage and send terrible messages about the reality of marriage by the way they live, in contrast to couples who are living in the brokenness of failed relationship, who can send a profoundly more effective message on marriage. I'm reminded of Francine's grandmother, who had a gambling husband, was abandoned in the days when there was no social security. She prayed for her grandchildren's marriage every night.
She said it started with a decade of the rosary for each of her own children, and then she used to do 3 Hail Marys for each of her grandchildren. And she prayed those her whole life until the day she died.
And the kids knew, and it was a witness. So every one of us, no matter what our state, can call the world to this reality. So there are 2 propositions for us to consider. The notion of empowerment in marriage, not just enrichment, and the question about how do we really show the reality of what we believe by the way we live.
So we invite you to use this time together well, to share in our successes and to offer words of encouragement to each other in our related missions. But most importantly, let's use this time to explore and to innovate, to together find new insights and new ways. May God bless this time together.